Magandang gabi po uli. Sa halip na ipasagot ko ito as assessment, ay mas mabuti sagutin na natin itong exercises o test items sa PSA 700, 701, 705, and 706. Ito ay konti lang naman at mabilis lang naman po ito. At yung iba, mabilis lang naman talaga sagutin dyan dahil simple recall lang ng terms. Okay, so we proceed, ladies and gentlemen, for the multiple choice. Number 1, it contains a clear expression of auditor's opinion on the financial statements. Of course, alam nyo yan na yan ay auditor's report. Of course, ang laman yan, hindi lang expression ng opinion. Pwede ring report on other legal and regulatory framework, hindi lang report sa financial statements. Next, number 2. Financial statements prepared in accordance with a financial reporting framework that is designed to meet the common information needs of a wide range of users. That is the general purpose financial statements. Next, number 3. Ito po yung tungkol sa attribute ng financial reporting framework na compliance framework or fair presentation framework. Kung naalala nyo kanina o doon sa unang lecture natin, yung fair presentation framework, yan po yung criteria for preparing the financial statements actually. Yung financial reporting framework, yan po yung ginagamit ng entity sa pag-prepare ng kanilang FS. At yan ay maaaring compliance framework or fair presentation framework. Kung fair presentation framework, ang attributes nun ay 3. Una, it requires compliance with the requirements of the framework. Pangalawa, it permits disclosures beyond the requirement of the framework. Pangatlo, it allows departure from requirement of the framework to achieve fair presentation of the FS. But for a compliance framework, talagang compliance with the requirements of the framework lang. Ibig sabihin po, kung compliance framework yan, hindi allowed ang mag-add ng disclosures beyond the requirements of the framework. Hindi allowed ang departure from the requirements of the framework. So, ang tanong dito, number 3, which is not true for a financial reporting framework that is classified as fair presentation framework. O, diba yung 3 attributes nila ng fair presentation ito? Yung letter D ang sagot na it does not permit management to provide disclosures beyond the requirements of the framework, and it does not permit management to depart from requirements of the framework. Hindi ganyan ang fair presentation framework. Allowed ang additional disclosures beyond the requirements of the framework. Allowed din po ang departure from the requirements of the framework just to achieve fair presentation of the financial statements. Next, number 4, responsible for FS. Well, that is very simple question. It is the entity's management who is responsible for the financial statements. At hindi lang yan, syempre, ang kanilang responsibility, pati internal control, yung ilalagay sa audit report na section ng responsibility for the financial statements section, pati yung responsibility ng management for the assessment ng going concern. Yun po ang tungkol sa responsibility ng management. So in general, ang may responsibility po sa preparation ng FS, management. Responsible for expression of opinion. Well, that's very easy. Auditor ang mayroong responsibility sa pag-express ng opinion. Phrase to express unmodified opinion on the FS that used fair presentation framework. Kung fair presentation framework yan, ang gagamitin po natin ay present fairly. Present fairly. Yan. Yan. In the international standards, it is the acceptable to or the equivalent of present fairly ay pwede ring give a true and fair view. Give a true and fair view. Yang are prepared in all material respects or have been prepared, ayan po ay para sa compliance framework. So, itong number 7, phrase to express unmodified opinion on the FS that used compliance framework. Letter D po, ang sagot. Are prepared in all material respects. Number 8, the criteria for evaluating the fairness of the financial statements. Ayan po yung financial reporting framework. Yan yung suitable criteria na tinatawag na elements ng assurance engagement. Kung maalala ninyo yung definition ng auditing provided by the AAA or American Accounting Association, na dinefine yung auditing na auditing is a systematic process of objectively obtaining and evaluating evidence regarding assertions about economic actions and events to ascertain the degree of correspondence between those assertions and established criteria. Yung established criteria in the case of financial statements, yan po yung financial reporting framework na ginamit ng entity sa pag-prepare ng FS. Na yung FS na yon ay nandun yung mga management representation in the form of assertion. Yan po yung criteria. Next, number 9, basis for forming an opinion on the FS. That's very simple. The basis is audit evidence. And how do you obtain evidence? Kailangan mag-perform ng procedures. And then yung procedures performed, evidence obtained, and the conclusions reached by the auditor, naka-record dapat yon sa audit documentation or working paper. Next, number 10. Which of the following is the correct titling of the audit report? Remember, ladies and gentlemen, ang tamang title ng report, nandun lagi yung word na independent. Independent Auditor's Report. Yan, or Report of Independent Auditor. Next, number 11. Ordinarily, the auditor's report is addressed to. Sino yung appropriate na addressee? Shareholders or to those charged with governance or both. That's the proper addressee. Now, where do you identify the financial statements na audited? Saang portion ng auditor's report? Or I mean, in what element? Maalala niyo ba kanina na doon sa may opinion ay sabihin doon, ay nakasulat doon, we have audited the financial statements of pati yung company. Tapos yung title ng financial statements na in-audit, which comprise the complete set ng financial statements. Makikita nyo po yun doon sa may opinion section. Ito po, kung para ma-recall ninyo, ladies and gentlemen, yung sample na audit report. We have audited the financial statements of ABC, which comprise the statement of financial position. Nandyan yung mga financial statements. Naka-identify dyan kung ano yung mga in-audit na financial statements. So it is identified in the opinion section of the auditor's report. Next, the first section of the audit report, the opinion section, contains the opinion and also the following. Except, alin ang hindi kasama dyan? Yung responsibility ng auditor kasi, separate section yan eh. Yung responsibility ng auditor, merong separate section. Wala dun sa may opinion section. Okay? Next, number 14. An unmodified opinion cannot be expressed when syempre kung hindi independent yung auditor. Disclaimer yan. Ano bang mga criteria or condition para makapag-express ng unmodified? Unang-una dyan, na-obtain yung reasonable assurance. Para masabing naka-obtain ka ng reasonable assurance, naka-obtain ka dapat ng sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. At syempre, walang material misstatements doon sa financial statements. Number 15, the basis for opinion section. The basis for opinion, section of the auditor's report shall be placed. Yung basis, kasunod mismo ng opinion. Una, opinion, tapos basis. After the opinion section, nandun yung basis. Alam nyo, nung panahon ko, nung akong nag-exam, 3 parts, 3 paragraph lang yan. Introductory paragraph, scope paragraph, opinion paragraph. Yung opinion paragraph, nasa dulo dati class yan eh. Tapos, standard audit report namin noon, 3 paragraphs lang, madaling i-memorize. Bawat sa undergraduate, talagang traditionally, the students are required to memorize the standard audit report. But now, sa haba nung audit report, hindi na mai-memorize yan. Total, pag nag-practice ka naman, kukopyahin mo na lang. CPA tayo copy-paste accountant lang naman. Kukopyahin na naman natin yan pag gumawa tayo ng opinion. Well, anyway, we continue. The basis for opinion section of the auditor's report following the opinion section shall include. Actually, narito yung scope ng audit. So you state there that the audit was conducted in accordance with PSA. Then we make a reference to the section of the auditor's report describing the auditor's responsibilities. We state that the auditor is independent of the entity. So tandaan niyo yan kung saan makikita yung mention ng independence. Doon sa may basis for opinion. A statement whether the auditor believes that the audit evidence that the auditor has obtained is sufficient and appropriate to provide a basis for the auditor's opinion. All of this are included in the basis for opinion. Next, number 17. Those matters that in the auditor's professional judgment were of most significance in the audit of FS of the current period, and they are selected from matters communicated with those charged with governance. PSA 701, ito po yung key audit matters. Yan. Key audit matters. And this is required for audit of listed entity. Now, for other information section of the auditor's report, we shall refer to PSA 720. Ang tinutukoy na other information ay financial or non-financial information other than the financial statement and auditor's report included in an entity's annual report. So we will reserve the lecture or elaboration of that dun sa next material natin regarding PSA 720. Next, number 20, management's responsibility for the preparation and fair presentation of the FS, which should be included in the auditor's report, does not include yung to express an opinion, hindi naman management responsibility yan eh. Auditor's responsibility yan. Yung preparing the FS in accordance with the financial reporting framework, responsibility for internal control, responsibility for assessing the entity's ability to continue as a going concern, kasama yon sa management responsibility. Next, number 21. Which of the following should not be included or not stated in the auditor's responsibility section of the auditor's report? Yung napakahaba na yon, makikita nyo doon, yung mga maraming responsibility ng auditor, nag-i-start sa objective. To obtain reasonable assurance, to express an opinion, responsibility to exercise professional judgment and professional skepticism, responsibility to obtain understanding, responsibility to afford the risk assessment of risk of material misstatements, at marami pang iba. Pero doon, di nyo makikita yung responsibility to perform test of controls. Although, yung pag-perform ng test of controls ay talagang bahagi ng further audit procedures yan. Kaya lang, alam niyo hindi naman pine-perform yan lagi. Pine-perform lang yung test of controls if the assessment of control risk includes expectation as to operating effectiveness of control, then that would be the case na required mag-perform ng test of controls. And when substantive procedures alone cannot provide sufficient appropriate evidence, yan din ang isang pagkakataon na magpe-perform ng test of controls. So, hindi laging pine-perform yan, ladies and gentlemen. Next, number 22. Report on other legal and regulatory requirements should be included in the auditor's report. Siyempre, wala yan sa opinion paragraph kasi other section yan eh. Separate section yan. So, pag mayroong report on other legal and regulatory requirements, yung auditor's report, dalawang report ang laman nun. Report on the audit of FS and then report on other legal and regulatory requirements. 23. The auditor's report should be dated. Ang tamang date niyan ay, kumbaga, sa pag-express ng ibang mga authors and other literatures, lalo sa US, sa last day ng fieldwork. But in our PSA, which is the equivalent actually, yung last day ng fieldwork mo, siyempre yung last day sa pag-obtain ng sufficient appropriate evidence. No earlier than the date on which the auditor has obtained sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Number 24, the opinion expressed by the auditor when he concludes that the financial statements are prepared or are presented fairly in all material respects in accordance with the applicable financial reporting framework. Yan po yung unmodified opinion. Yung number 25, when he concludes that the FS are materially misstated or when he was not able to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence and in his judgment the effect or possible effect is material but not pervasive. So we are referring to qualified opinion. Number 26, opinion expressed by the auditor when he concludes that the financial statements are materially misstated and in his judgment the effect of the FS is material and pervasive. So that is adverse opinion. The financial statements do not present fairly. Yun ang ibig sabihin nun. Next, the opinion expressed by the auditor when he was not able to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence and in his judgment Possible effect on the FS is material and pervasive. Hindi naka-obtain ng sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Possible effect, material and pervasive. Abay, disclaimer of opinion po yan. Next, number 28. When an auditor lacks independence with respect to a client, the auditor should issue a disclaimer, syempre. Next, number 29. Under which of the following set of circumstances might the auditors disclaim an opinion? Kailan ba nagdi-disclaim ng opinion? Pag hindi independent yung auditor. Kapag ang auditor is unable to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence and the possible effects on the FS is material and pervasive. Hindi pumili na lang kayo dyan. May limitations on the audit. Ang ibig sabihin nun, pag inability to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Eto, there are significant scope limitations on the audit. 30. The auditor's inability to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence is also referred to as scope limitation pang ibig sabihin nun. Limitation on the scope of the audit. Next, 31. The auditor's inability to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence, which is also referred to as limitation on the scope of the audit, may arise from, so ito yung types of scope limitation. Circumstantial scope limitation, na dalawa ang klase. Circumstances beyond the control of the entity, then circumstances relating to the nature or timing of the auditor's work. And then the other is management-imposed limitation. All of the above actually, yan po ay scope limitation. May give rise to limitation on the scope of the audit. Number 32. Which of the following scope limitations is a management-imposed limitation? Hindi yan mahirap piliin, class. Hindi yan mahirap piliin. Hindi yan mahirap sagutin. Mag-eliminate ng choices na lang. Alam nyo ang technique sa auditing theory. Marunong kayo dapat ng elimination process. Yung mga impossible na sagot, tanggalin ninyo. Unless ma-identify nyo na kaagad kung ano yung sagot. In this case, excuse me, the accounting records have been destroyed. Circumstantial yan eh. The accounting records have been seized indefinitely by governmental authorities. Circumstantial lang mga yan. Timing, ganun din, due to appointment of the auditor. So it should be letter E. Management prevents the auditor from observing the counting of physical inventory. That is a management-imposed limitation. 33. The existence of audit risk is recognized by the statement in the auditor's report. Ito ay tungkol sa reasonable assurance, ladies and gentlemen. Yung audit risk ay, that is the risk that the auditor may unknowingly fail to appropriately modify his opinion on financial statements that contain material misstatements. Yung risk na makapagbigay ang auditor ng unmodified sa FS na mayroon palang material misstatements, yun ang ibig sabihin nun. At yan ay tungkol sa reasonable assurance, ano? Kaya nga, dahil may audit risk which cannot be eliminated because there remains an avoidable risk that even some material misstatements may remain undiscovered. And for that reason, we cannot provide absolute assurance in auditing. We can only provide reasonable assurance. Audit risk will always be there. So, reasonable assurance. Next, number 34, an auditor may reasonably issue a qualified opinion for scope limitation, di ba? Pwedeng mag-result yan sa qualified opinion. Kailan qualified opinion? If the possible effect is material but not pervasive. Unjustified accounting change. So, ibig sabihin, there was a change in accounting policy and the auditor did not concur with the management. Or ibig sabihin, hindi na-justify ng management kung nagkaroon ng disagreement between auditor and management regarding the application of the accounting. Yan po yung tinatawag na unjustified, ano? Hindi sila nagkasundo. Sa pananaw ng auditor, ganito dapat yung accounting. So, tungkol yan sa financial statements. If the effect on the FS is material but not pervasive, then qualified opinion. Kasi pag mayroong change in accounting policy, kung yun naman ay appropriately accounted and disclosed, it would not affect the auditor's opinion. But if that is unjustified, then it might result to qualified, or if the effect is material and pervasive, yun po ay hahantong sa adverse opinion. Next, number 35. An auditor was unable to obtain sufficient competent evidential matter. Yung term na competent, yung dating gamit class sa PSA tsaka sa US standards. Pero ngayon, tawag dyan sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Yung dating tawag, competence of evidential matter. Ngayon, appropriateness, due to inadequacy of the accounting records. Ang tandaan nyo dyan, unable to obtain sufficient competent evidential matter. So, dalawa lang pagpipilian natin dyan, class. Either qualified or disclaimer. Yun ang pwedeng dyan. Opinion na to be issued. So, ito po, letter D. Disclaimer of opinion and a qualified opinion. Depende po sa pervasiveness ng possible effects. Number 36. Which of the following phrases should be included in the opinion paragraph when an auditor expresses qualified opinion? Ang paraan ng pag-express ng qualified ay except for the effects or except for the possible effects. Yun po. Hindi when read in conjunction with note X with the foregoing explanation, hindi ganoon except for yung gamit na phrase sa pag-qualify ng opinion. So, no. 37. When an auditor expresses adverse opinion, the opinion paragraph should include actually may reference ka doon kung saan nakalagay yung explanation or yung matter that gave rise to adverse opinion. I-refer mo doon sa basis for adverse opinion. So there is a direct reference to a separate paragraph disclosing the basis for the adverse opinion. Parang ganito yan, Dahil lang para makita niyo yung binabanggit ko sa inyong PSA 705 na sinagot natin kanina. PSA 705, sandali lang class atin na. Para makita nyo yung reference na tinutukoy. I-refer mo, ibig sabihin. Because of the significance of the matters described in the basis for opinion paragraph, yan yung reference na tinutukoy. Significance of the matter. Ito kasi nasa opinion paragraph class. Itong phrase na yan, nasa opinion paragraph yan. Yung matter that give rise to modification ng opinion, nandun sa may basis paragraph. And in the opinion paragraph, you make reference as described, because of the significance of the matters described in the basis. Ayun, ibig sabihin nun. Parang yung pag may emphasis of matter ka, mayroon kang reference to the notes to FS as described in the note X. Pag mag-emphasize ka ng matter. Yan ang ibig sabihin na make a reference, ha? Tuloy na tayo. Malapit na po itong matapos. 50 items lang po ito. Number 37 na tayo. 38, Cheng CPA was engaged to audit the FS of Essex Company after its fiscal year had ended. The timing of Cheng's appointment as auditor and the start of field work made confirmation of accounts receivable by direct communication with debtors ineffective. However, Cheng applied other procedures and was satisfied to the reasonableness of the account balances. Aba, di na-perform niya yung alternative procedures. That means, na-perform niya yung scope. Walang inability to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence. Naka-obtain nga siya by alternative procedures. So, unqualified or unmodified, Mga lumang tanong to sa board exam class kaya unqualified ang nandyan. Yan, nagtataka ako dun sa syllabi, matagal nang ang gamit, unmodified, unqualified pa rin yata ang nandun. Anyway, tuloy po tayo, number 39. A limitation on the scope of an audit sufficient to preclude an unqualified or unmodified opinion will usually result when management, scope limitation ang tinatanong dito, scope limitation that would preclude or that would negate unqualified opinion. Scope limitation. Maghanap kayo dyan ng scope limitation. May clue naman dyan inability to obtain evidence. Kung disclosure ay matter regarding FS yan. Hindi yan scope limitation. Dati ang tawag dyan, pag disagreement between management and the auditor. Ngayon, material misstatements in the FS. Kasi yung material misstatements, ladies and gentlemen, pag hindi nag-agree yung auditor at saka yung management. Kasi pag may material misstatements, bago naman mag-issue ng opinion yan, kino-communicate yan sa management at re-request ang management na i-correct. Pag hindi kinorek ng management, susunod sa higher level, i-communicate sa those charged with governance. I-request na i-correct. Pag ayaw talagang i-correct, magmo-modify ka na ng opinion. Yun ang ginagawa dyan. Yan. So, it is letter A. Unable to obtain audited FS supporting the entity's investment in foreign subsidiary. Kasi kung may foreign subsidiary ka, foreign operation, i-equity method mo halimbawa yan. Yung FS, doon naka-based yung amount ng re-recognize mong equity in subsidiary income or equity in share or profit of the associate, kaya kailangan mo talaga nung FS para doon mo i-check kung tama yung na-recognize at ma-compute mo yung tamang value ng investment. Number 40. When the auditor is unable to determine the amounts associated with the illegal acts of a client personnel because of inability to obtain evidence. Scope limitation na naman yan. Pag scope limitation, dalawa lang naman yan eh. Qualified or disclaimer. Hindi naman pwede yung letter A. Subject to, qualified opinion. Walang subject to na ginagamit na phrase. Except for ang gamit natin. Hindi naman adverse opinion yan. Disclaimer. Pwedeng mag-result yan sa mag-result to disclaimer of opinion if the possible effect is material and pervasive. Next, 41. Limitation on the scope of the audit sufficient to preclude an unmodified opinion will always result when management, scope limitation yan ha. Eto, management imposed. Management refuses to permit its lawyer to respond to the letter of audit inquiry. Kasi, ang auditor kukuha ng corroborating evidence regarding litigations and claims. Kaya magpapadala siya ng letter sa counsel ng client. Necessary procedure yon. Kung ayaw nila, limitation po yon. Next, 42. In which of the following circumstances would an adverse opinion be appropriate? Kailan ina-express yung adverse? Kapag may material misstatements in the FS. And the effect is material and pervasive. May misstatements in the FS. O alin ba dyan? The auditor is not independent. Hindi naman yan magre-result sa adverse eh. Disclaimer yan. The statements are not in conformity with GAAP because they omit statement of changes in financial position. Wala namang FS na ganyan eh. Na statement of changes in financial position. Ang FS ay statement of financial position, statement of cash flows, statement of changes in equity. Pero dati alam nyo merong ganyan. Kaya lang napalitan na yan ng statement of cash flows at statement of changes in equity. Ito, letter C. The statements are not in conformity with GAAP regarding pension plans. If the effect is material and pervasive, adverse opinion ang labas niyan. Next, 43. An auditor decides to issue a qualified opinion on an entity's FS because a major inadequacy in its computerized accounting records prevents the auditor from applying necessary procedures. So, scope limitation po ito. The opinion paragraph of the auditor's report should state that the qualification pertains to madaling sagutin yan, class. Qualified due to inability to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence. In our opinion, except for the possible effects. Ganon ang sasabihin po sa my opinion paragraph. (44) Determine whether the following will be written in the emphasis of matter paragraph or other matter paragraph. Ano bang pagkaiba nun? Ng emphasis of matter tsaka other matter. Yung emphasis of matter paragraph ay matter presented or disclosed in the FS, which in the auditor's judgment is of such importance to the user's understanding of the FS. Pag other matter paragraph, matter not presented and not disclosed in the FS. Talagang hindi naka-present yan, hindi naka-disclose. Kasi, matter about audit, auditor's responsibility, or auditor's report. O alin ba dyan ang emphasis of matter? Save mo. Ayan. Hindi, hanggang ito na ay. Malapit na, 5 items na lang. Financial reporting framework prescribed by law or regulation is unacceptable. Emphasis to matter yan. Highlight the existence of material uncertainty relating to the event or condition that may cast significant doubt on the entity's ability to continue as a going concern. PSA 570 ang reporting natin dyan. Yung material uncertainty, ito ang clue ninyo. Matter presented in the FS or disclosed. Dinidisclose yan eh. Yung material uncertainty. Tsaka yung going concern, underlying assumption sa pag-prepare ng FS yan. Emphasis to matter. To alert users of auditor's report on the FS, that the FS are prepared in accordance with special purpose framework. O di tungkol sa FS uli, hindi naman mahirap sagutin yung emphasis tsaka other matter eh. Emphasis of matter yan. To state that the FS of the prior period were audited by the predecessor auditor. Tungkol sa audit na yan. Understanding of the auditor's responsibility and auditor's report. Other matter. To state that the corresponding figures are unaudited. Other matter uli. To describe material inconsistencies. Yung tinutukoy na material inconsistencies ay yung inconsistency ng financial statements at saka yung other information. We will elaborate that pagdating sa PSA 720. But that will be in other matter paragraph. Next, number 45. An audit of winning company, a diamond mining company, brings to light the fact that its equipment has been marked up to the owner's expectation of market values. Such a situation most likely result in which type of report? Nag-mark up sila ng equipment based on expectation. Inappropriate accounting yun. Ni-write up nila yung value based on expectation of market value. Hindi yun, acceptable. Mayroong level ng, pag-estimate ng fair value. Halimbawa ang model na ginamit ng entity ay, alam niyo naman sa PPE, dalawang model yan. May cost model tapos revaluation model. Paano i-measure yung fair value nun? Meron tayong iba't ibang level ng input. Level 1, level 2, level 3. At hindi sa expectation ng owners. Adverse opinion yan. If the effect is material and pervasive. 46. In which one of the following instances would an auditor issue an adverse opinion? Adverse opinion Pagtungkol sa material misstatements yan. Management declines to present earnings per share in the income statement. There is substantial doubt about the entity's ability to continue as a going concern. There is a material misstatement that overshadows the entire FS. Parang mayroong sagot na, no? The client does not allow the auditor to send confirmation. Pag misstatement that overshadows the entire FS, yan po yun. Material misstatements, pervasive yan. Yung letter B, kahit may substantial doubt, basta yan ay nakadisclose, okay pa naman yan. Pag may material uncertainty, except kung multiple material uncertainties, disclaimer na ang mangyayari. Management declines to present earnings per share in the income statement. Pwede namang nasa notes yun eh. The client does not allow the auditor to send confirmations to its 3 largest clients. Scope limitation po yun. Inability to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. 47, when an auditor lacks independence, alam nyo na yan, pag walang independence, disclaimer. Next, scope restriction is least likely to result in, pag scope limitation or scope restriction, dalawa ang doon mangyayari. It's either qualified or disclaimer. So, ang sagot, pumili nga kayo dyan, C and D. Hindi pwedeng isagot yung D kasi ang pinag-uusapan na scope restriction ay para sa mga modified opinion lang. Ito po, adverse opinion. Least likely to result in adverse opinion. Hindi dyan nanggagaling ang adverse opinion class. Next, last two, an audit client has refused to allow the auditors to perform generally accepted auditing procedure. So, a required procedure has not been performed. So, there is a scope limitation in this case. This circumstance would normally result in the issuance of, dalawa yan, it's either qualified or disclaimer. Disclaimer lang naman ang nari. Wala namang yung except for na opinion Yan yung phrase na ginagamit sa pag-qualify ng opinion. Pero hindi yan yung type ng opinion. Next, the last item. At least nakabawas na ito class. Hindi nyo na sasagutin bilang assessment. Pero sana sagutin nyo yung mga assessment because that will be the basis of your compliance and that will be the basis of computing your grades and finally the basis for issuing your transcript and your certificate of completion for the refresher course. Pagsikapan nyo sanang kumplituhin yung mga assessment na yan. Maximum tolerance naman kami, hindi namin kino-close yan. We give you ample time to answer, to access. I just need your cooperation, ladies and gentlemen, because we need to comply with the requirements of the BOA Resolution 46 series of 2020. Yung nag-uusapan natin, compliance. Kaya dapat mag-comply talaga tayo. Okay, so number 50. Under which of the following set of circumstances might the auditors disclaim an opinion? Disclaimer ha. Naulit lang ito Kanina may sinagot na tayong ganito. Sa scope limitation yan, pag disclaimer Di ba? Significant scope limitations on the audit. Ayan po, maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Natapos po tayo sa PSA 700, 701, 705, 706. Ang susunod kong recording ay mga awitin ng 1980s hanggang 1990s. Joke lang po. Yung tungkol sa 5.0 at saka PSA 710, 720. Okay? Sige po, that completes our session for PSA 700, 701, 705, and 706. Thank you very much to all, and God bless you. Bye.